My name is Alex, I'm 32 years old, and I build things for a living. Not just buildings, but my own life, piece by painful piece, out of the rubble of what I was told I should be. For as long as I can remember, I've been the family fixer, the reliable one, the sturdy, unglamorous foundation that my charismatic, reckless older brother, Leo, was supposed to build his glorious life upon. I was the one you called when the car broke down, when the rent was late, when a mess needed cleaning. I never got the praise, but I was always expected to be there with a bucket and mop. It was my designated role. Then came a dinner, a single evening that was meant to be just another performance in our long-running family play. It was at my house, the one I built with my own two hands. My wife Sarah and I were hosting my parents, my brother Leo, and, for the first time, Sarah's mother, Diane. The air was thick with unspoken expectations. Then it happened. Rushing from the kitchen with a bottle of red wine, I misjudged the space, swerving to avoid our dog. I stumbled, bumping into my mother-in-law. A splash of Merlot, no bigger than a coin, landed on her beige blouse. Before I could even form the word sorry, a sharp, stinging crack echoed in the dining room. Diane had slapped me. Hard. Across the face, in front of everyone. The shock of it, the sheer disproportionate violence, stole the air from my lungs. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing my own family's reaction in that frozen moment. Leo's lips curled into a barely concealed smirk. My father's face hardened, not with concern for me, but with anger. And my mother? Her eyes filled with tears of pure, unadulterated shame, ashamed of me. The real story isn't about that slap. It's about what it revealed, and the phone call I had received just 2 days prior, a call that had secretly armed me with enough firepower to burn the whole rotten charade to the ground. Before I continue, and tell you how that one stinging palm print unraveled decades of lies and led to the biggest confrontation of my life, do me a favor. Drop a comment if you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to build you up. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know what it's like to be the family fixer, because you need to hear how this ends. To understand the silence that followed that slap, you have to understand the silence I grew up in. My childhood home was a place of defined roles. My brother, Leo, was the son. He was 2 years older, effortlessly charming, handsome, and filled with a kind of dazzling, careless confidence that our parents mistook for genius. He was destined for greatness, they were sure of it. All evidence to the contrary was just a temporary setback on his heroic journey. I was the moon, a secondary object, there to reflect his light and manage the tides he created. I was quiet, practical, good with my hands. In my family's eyes, this didn't translate to potential, but to utility. Leo got dreams, I got responsibilities. When Leo turned 16, a slightly used but still gleaming convertible appeared in the driveway, a surprise gift. The logic, as my father explained it, was that a popular boy like Leo needed a car to maintain his social standing. When I turned 16, I got a lecture on fiscal responsibility and a bus pass. I remember asking my father, "What about me?" He put his hand on my shoulder, his expression one of weary patience. "Alex, you're practical. You can save up. Leo, he needs the encouragement." This became the refrain of my life. Leo needed. I could manage. Every wall in our house was covered with Leo's trophies, soccer, debate team, even a local talent show he'd won with a mediocre magic act. My achievements were quieter. I won a state-level award for a detailed architectural model I built in shop class. I brought the certificate home, beaming. My mother glanced at it, smiled faintly, and said, "That's nice, dear. Have you seen Leo's report card? He got a B in English." She taped my certificate to the side of the refrigerator, where it was soon covered by grocery lists and takeout menus. Leo's B- paper was framed and hung in the hallway. I learned early on not to compete for the spotlight, it was never going to swing my way. Instead, I retreated to the garage, to the world of wood, wires, and concrete plans. I started working part-time at a hardware store when I was 15, not because I was told to, but because I wanted my own money, my own independence. I saved every dollar I could. Meanwhile, Leo burned through cash. He launched a series of business ventures in his early 20s, each one more disastrous than the last. There was the custom t-shirt company that ended with 2,000 misprinted shirts in our basement. Then came the gourmet dog treat bakery, which he abandoned after realizing it involved waking up before noon. Each time, my parents would sigh, shake their heads with a sort of fond exasperation, and write another check. "He's an entrepreneur," my father would declare. It takes a few tries to find your footing. When I graduated high school and wanted to go to a top-tier trade school for construction management, I asked them for help with the tuition. It was a fraction of what they'd given Leo for his failed businesses. My father sat me down for another one of his talks. "Alex, a trade is a safe bet. You'll be fine. You don't need a fancy school for that. Your brother, his ideas could change the world. We have to invest in that potential." They didn't give me a dime. I took out loans. I worked 2 jobs while I studied. I ate ramen noodles and wore threadbare clothes. And every weekend, I'd get a call from my mother, "Can you come fix the leaky faucet?" Leo tried, and now the whole bathroom is flooded, and I would go. Because that was my job. I was the fixer. I was the reliable one. I was the one who would always be fine. My real education didn't happen in a classroom. It happened on dusty, noisy construction sites under the watchful eye of a man named Frank Henderson. Mr. Henderson owned the small, respected construction company where I got my first job after trade school. He was a relic from another era, a man whose hands were as calloused as his honesty was brutal. He was in his late 60s, with a face like a roadmap of every project he'd ever managed. He saw something in me that my own father never had. It wasn't just that I was a hard worker, plenty of guys were. He saw the way I studied blueprints, the way I anticipated problems, the way I treated every 2x4 and every box of nails with a quiet respect. "You don't just see the job, kid," he grunted at me one day, after I'd found a critical flaw in an architect's plan that saved us thousands. "You see the entire building." Most people can't do that. Mr. Henderson became the father figure I'd always craved. He never praised me easily, but when he did, it felt like winning an Olympic medal. He taught me how to bid a job, how to manage a disgruntled crew, how to talk to clients, and, most importantly, how to know my own worth. While my family saw my job as a respectable but unremarkable trade, Mr. Henderson saw it as an empire in the making. I kept my head down and worked, but I also watched and learned. And I saved. Oh, God, did I save. Every dollar from every overtime hour, every bonus, every side job I took on weekends, it all went into a separate account. I lived like a monk, driving a 10-year-old truck and living in a tiny apartment, long after I could have afforded more. My family just assumed I was barely scraping by. "It's a shame Alex doesn't have more ambition," I once overheard my mother telling an aunt on the phone. But I suppose someone has to be the worker bee. The irony was a knife in my gut. They had no idea that my worker bee savings account was growing into a formidable sum. 5 years after I started working for him, Mr. Henderson called me into his office. He told me he was retiring. He wanted to sell the company. He'd had offers from larger corporations, but he didn't want his legacy to be swallowed up. "I want to sell it to you, Alex," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He named a price. It was fair, but it was a number that would make most people's heads spin. He slid a piece of paper across the desk with a number on it, expecting me to gasp, to ask for a payment plan. Instead, I took a deep breath and slid a bank statement back across to him. It showed my savings. It was enough for a down payment so substantial it would make the bank loan a formality. Mr. Henderson stared at the statement, then up at me, his eyes wide. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew you were the one. I bought Henderson Construction 3 years ago. I kept the name but added my own touch, modernizing our systems and aggressively pursuing bigger contracts. To my family, I was still Alex, the foreman. I never told them. It wasn't just to avoid their inevitable requests for money for Leo, it was more than that. This success was mine. It was the one thing in my life they hadn't touched, hadn't minimized, hadn't repurposed to serve the narrative of Leo's greatness. It was a secret garden I had cultivated in the dark, and I wasn't ready to let them trample all over it. Back in my dining room, the stinging on my cheek was already fading, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The slap wasn't the attack, it was the starting pistol for a war that had been brewing for 30 years. My wife, Sarah, recovered first. She rushed to my side, her face a mask of fury directed at her own mother. "Mom! What is wrong with you? He barely touched you." "Apologize to him." Right now Diane, her hand still tingling, looked flustered and indignant. "He came at me. And he's ruined my blouse." The sheer absurdity of it was breathtaking. But then, my own family's betrayal cut deeper than any slap ever could. My father, his voice dangerously low, pointed a finger at me. "Alex! Don't you dare embarrass this family. You created this scene. You will apologize to Diane, and you will apologize to your mother for upsetting her." My mother was, on cue, weeping into a napkin. "I can't believe you would do this," she sobbed. "On such an important night." Leo, ever the peacemaker who always sided with power, stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. "Come on, bro," he said, his voice oozing with false reason. "Just say you're sorry. It's not a big deal. Let's just get back to the evening." Not a big deal. Being physically assaulted in my own home was not a big deal. What was a big deal, apparently, was the real reason for this important night. It wasn't about meeting Sarah's mother. It was an ambush. Leo had another one of his ingenious ideas, a high-end, artisanal coffee roastery and cafe. It would be rustic chic, a guaranteed moneymaker, he claimed. And all he needed to get started was a business loan. A massive one. A loan he had no hope of getting on his own. They had orchestrated this entire dinner, bringing in my mother-in-law as an unwitting prop, to create an atmosphere of familial bliss before cornering me to co-sign the loan. The slap had just inconveniently fast-forwarded the agenda. "Leo," my father said, turning his glare from me to my brother, "maybe now isn't the time." "No, it's the perfect time." Leo insisted, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of his own brilliance. He looked at me, completely ignoring the tension. "Alex, this is it. The big one. But the bank wants a co-signer with a stable income and good credit. That's you, little brother. This is our chance to get rich together." The entitlement was staggering. He didn't ask. He informed me of my role. But as I stood there, a strange calm washed over me. Because I was thinking about that phone call from 2 days before. It was my lawyer, a woman as sharp and unforgiving as a nail gun. "Alex," she'd said, "the ink is dry. The city council approved it. You've got the downtown library renovation contract. Congratulations, you're about to be very, very busy." That contract wasn't just a job, it was a game changer. It was generational wealth. It was freedom. And it was the armor I didn't know I needed for this very moment. I looked at Leo, at my parents, at the whole pathetic, desperate scene they had orchestrated in my home. And I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I was the bank. And they had no idea. The pressure in the room was immense, a physical weight of expectation. My father, seeing my silence as hesitation, pressed his advantage. "You owe this family, Alex. We raised you, we fed you, we put a roof over your head. The least you can do is help your brother finally achieve his potential." I almost choked on the hypocrisy. I looked at Leo, who was nodding earnestly, as if my father's words were gospel. "Yeah, man," Leo chimed in, a picture of brotherly sincerity. "I've always had your back." The delusion was so profound, so complete, it was almost a work of art. For a moment, I just stared at them, replaying 30 years of evidence to the contrary in my mind. The missed birthdays because I had to work a double shift. The cancelled plans because I had to drive 2 hours to fix Leo's latest disaster. The complete and utter lack of interest in any aspect of my life that didn't directly benefit them. A sound escaped my lips. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full, bitter laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had finally reached the end of a very long, very cruel joke. My back? I repeated, my voice dripping with an irony they were incapable of detecting. You had my back, Leo. I turned to him, my gaze flat and cold. You want me to co-sign a loan for $500,000 for a coffee shop? Let's talk about your business acumen. What about the t-shirt company? Or the dog treats? Or the drone photography business where you immediately crashed a $5,000 drone into a lake? How much of Mom and Dad's retirement did you burn through on those? Leo flushed a deep, ugly red. Those were learning experiences. They were expensive learning experiences, my father boomed, stepping forward. How dare you speak to your brother like that? You have a stable job, a paycheck. He's an entrepreneur. It requires taking risks. A stable job, I echoed, shaking my head slowly. You really have no idea, do you? Any of you? I let my eyes drift around the room, taking in the high ceilings, the custom-built shelving, the polished hardwood floors. You're sitting in this house. Did you ever once ask me how I could afford it? Did it ever occur to you to wonder what I do all day? My mother sniffled. You work in construction, Alex. It's a good, honest living. I don't work in construction, I said, my voice dropping but carrying across the suddenly silent room. I own the construction company. I bought out Mr. Henderson 3 years ago. Henderson Construction is my company. Stunned silence. Pure, unadulterated shock rendered them speechless. My mother-in-law's mouth hung open. Leo looked like he'd been struck by lightning. My parents' faces were a slow-motion car crash of emotions, first anger, then confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a dawning, grotesque avarice. And that phone call I mentioned. I continued, pressing my advantage. The one from my lawyer on Thursday? That was to confirm that my company just landed the downtown library renovation contract. It's a multi-million-dollar project. The biggest in our firm's history. The silence deepened, if that was even possible. The air crackled. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed around me. I was no longer the moon. I was the sun. And they were just starting to feel the burn. My father was the first to find his voice, and the speed with which he pivoted was nauseating. The anger vanished, replaced by a syrupy, opportunistic warmth. Son, he said, taking a step towards me, his hand spread wide. You own the company? A multi-million-dollar contract? My boy. Why didn't you tell us? We are so incredibly proud of you. The words, proud of you, felt like acid in my ears. They had never said them with such conviction, and the fact that it took millions of dollars to finally pry them out made the sentiment utterly worthless. My mother, seeing her cue, began to cry again, but these were not tears of shame. They were tears of greedy relief. Oh, Alex, she wept, dabbing her eyes. All that money, and you let us worry so much about Leo. We could have helped him ages ago. The sheer, unmitigated gall of that statement, that my secret success was an inconvenience because it could have been used to fund their failures sooner, lit a fire in my chest. Then came Leo. His shock morphed into a manic, wide-eyed excitement, the look of a man who just found a winning lottery ticket on the ground. Dude! You're loaded, he exclaimed, his voice cracking. That's insane. Well, that changes everything, doesn't it? A $500,000 loan is nothing to you now. This is perfect. We can be partners. Equal partners. He was already spending my money in his head. That was the moment my spine, which had been slowly forged in the fires of their neglect, turned to pure, unbending steel. I held up a single hand, and the word I spoke cut through their greedy chatter like a saw through soft pine. Stop! They all fell silent, looking at me, expecting me to lay out the terms of their new, comfortable future. Just stop talking, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. The answer about the loan is no. It was no 10 minutes ago when you thought I was a nobody, and it is a resounding hell no now that you know the truth. I locked eyes with my father. And you are not proud of me. You are proud of my bank account. There's a difference. I then turned to my mother. And you didn't worry about Leo. You enabled him. You handicapped him with your refusal to let him fail. Finally, I looked at my brother. We will never be partners, Leo. Partners bring something to the table. Partners have mutual respect. We have none of that. I pointed a finger at him, the weight of a lifetime of resentment behind it. You didn't have my back. You stood on it to get a better view. I looked at my parents. You didn't raise me. You housed me. You raised him, I said, gesturing to a stunned Leo. You poured every drop of your money, your time, your faith into your golden boy, and you left me to fend for myself. So I did. Frank Henderson was more of a father to me than you ever were. He saw me. You only ever saw a tool you could use. The truth hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I turned to my wife, Sarah. Her eyes were shining with tears, but also with a fierce pride. She took my hand, her grip firm and steady. Let's go, I whispered, needing to get out of my own house. But Sarah stood her ground. We're already home, Alex, she said, her voice clear and strong, for all of them to hear. They can leave. I looked at the stunned, shattered faces of my family of origin. The people who were supposed to be my everything. She's right, I said, my voice void of all emotion except a profound, bottomless exhaustion. Get out of my house. And with that, I turned my back on them. I took Sarah's hand, and we walked into the living room, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their own making. The days that followed the dinner were a deluge. My phone became a weapon used against me, a constant source of incoming fire. The first wave was led by my mother, the master of emotional warfare. She left long, rambling voicemails, her voice thick with tears. How could you be so cruel, Alex? After everything we've done for you? Your brother looks up to you. He's heartbroken. You're tearing this family apart over a little bit of money. It's just money. Family is what's important. The hypocrisy was so potent it was almost comical. For 30 years, money, or the lack thereof for me, and the abundance of it for Leo, had been the primary language of our family. Now that I had it and wouldn't share, it was suddenly a meaningless trifle. My father tried a different tactic, brute force and paternal authority. His texts were blunt and demanding. I am still your father. You will show this family the respect it deserves. Call me immediately. When I didn't respond, he left a furious voicemail, threatening to write me out of his will, a threat so laughably empty I almost felt sorry for him. There was nothing left to inherit but Leo's debts. Leo, for his part, tried to play the cool brother card. He sent me texts filled with emojis and breezy slang. Hey man, sorry things got so heated the other night. Total misunderstanding. Let's grab a beer, just you and me, and clear the air. I've got this killer revised business plan, you'll love it. You can be a silent partner, I'll do all the work, you won't have to lift a finger. He genuinely believed that the only obstacle had been the public setting, not the decades of blatant favoritism and his own track record of incompetence. They even tried to weaponize my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She was the one relative who had always shown me a quiet kindness, sending me $20 for my birthday when my parents forgot. She called me one afternoon, and I braced for another lecture. But her voice was soft. Alex, she said. Your mother called me. She told me their side of it. And I just wanted to call you and say, I am so proud of you. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. They never saw you, honey, she continued, her voice tinged with sadness. They were blinded by Leo's sparkle. I'm sorry it took you getting slapped in your own home to do it, but I'm glad you finally stood up for yourself. She then warned me that my parents were painting me as a villain to the extended family, a greedy, arrogant monster who had turned his back on them the moment he got rich. Don't you believe it, she said firmly. Anyone with eyes can see who you are. Through all of this, Sarah was my fortress. She and my best friend, Dave, who was also my second-in-command at the company, formed a protective barrier around me. Sarah screened my calls, deleted the toxic messages, and held me when the sheer weight of it all felt too heavy. Dave made sure work was a sanctuary, handling any issues that arose so I could focus on my own battle. "They aren't family, Alex," Sarah told me one night as I stared blankly at my phone. "They're shareholders who just found out their least promising stock is the only one that paid off. You don't owe them a dividend. You've already paid in full." She was right. I was done paying. The boundary line had been drawn not in sand, but in concrete. And I was holding firm. In the quiet that followed my resolute silence, the natural laws of cause and effect, which my family had so long defied, began to reassert themselves. Without my name on the application, Leo's $500,000 loan was, of course, emphatically rejected. The bank, it turned out, actually cared about things like credit history and viable business plans. Leo's castle in the sky, built on a foundation of entitlement, came crashing down. The consequences, however, didn't stop with him. I learned from Aunt Carol that my parents, in their unshakable faith in Leo's genius and my eventual capitulation, had taken out a second mortgage on their home to fund his preliminary expenses, things like a commercial lease deposit and overpriced consulting fees. They had bet the farm, assuming I was their guaranteed payout. Now, with no loan and no savior, the bank came calling. The calls they'd been dodging for weeks became foreclosure notices. The family home I grew up in, the one filled with all of Leo's trophies and my ghosts, went up for sale. Watching the for sale sign go up from a distance was a strange, hollow experience. It was a place of deep hurt for me, but it was also the only home they had ever known. Seeing them lose it because of their own blindness was not a victory, it was just a tragedy. They were forced to move into a small, two-bedroom rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. The shock to their system was profound. Leo, stripped of his funding and his parents' ability to support his lifestyle, had to do something he hadn't done in over a decade: get a real job. He ended up working as an assistant manager at a big-box retail store. The charismatic charm that had always worked on our parents was less effective on tired shoppers and apathetic teenage employees. For the first time, he was accountable to someone other than his own ego. While their world was contracting, mine was expanding. The library project was a massive success, leading to more contracts and a profile piece in a regional business journal. But the real work was internal. Sarah convinced me to start seeing a therapist. Unpacking 30 years of emotional neglect and learning to dismantle the deeply ingrained belief that my worth was conditional was the hardest construction project I'd ever undertaken. Week by week, I chipped away at the faulty foundation my family had laid, learning to replace it with my own concrete sense of self-worth. I learned that their inability to see me was their failing, not mine. I learned that my value didn't come from a contract or a bank statement, it came from my integrity, my resilience, and my ability to build a good life despite them. Sarah and I grew closer than ever, our relationship a testament to what real partnership looks like. We were building our own family, with friends like Dave and a supportive aunt, proving that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who sees you, and who helps you heal. Months turned into almost a year. The angry calls and manipulative texts had long since ceased, replaced by a vast, empty silence. I didn't reach out, and neither did they. I was healing, building a new normal on the foundations of peace and respect I had fought so hard for. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" A woman's voice, hesitant and fragile, replied. "Alex? It's Mom." She sounded so different from the weeping manipulator or the indignant matriarch I remembered. She sounded small. I waited, my guard instantly up. I expected a plea, a new angle, another demand disguised as a request. But it never came. Instead, after a long pause, she said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About that night. About everything." Her voice cracked. "You were right, Alex. About all of it. I failed you. As a mother, I failed you. And I am so sorry." The apology hung in the air between us. It wasn't perfect. I could still hear notes of self-pity in her tone, the sorrow of a woman mourning her own fall from grace. But beneath it, for the first time, there was a glimmer of genuine remorse. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. She told me my father was too proud and stubborn to ever pick up the phone, but that he was lost, wandering through their small apartment like a ghost. And Leo, she said, was different. He was tired, but he was working hard. He'd been promoted to store manager. He was paying his own rent. He was, for the first time in his life, standing on his own 2 feet. I listened, absorbing the information without comment. I told her I had to go but that I would think about what she said. I spent the next few days talking it over with Sarah and with my therapist. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could just flip. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be instantly glued back together. But my therapist asked a simple question: what do you want your future to look like? And I knew I didn't want to carry this anger forever. I decided to offer a chance. Not a return to the past, but an opportunity for a new beginning. I called her back and invited her to have coffee with me at a neutral cafe downtown. She agreed immediately. The meeting was painfully awkward. She cried, and I sat there, uncomfortable but resolute. She apologized again, more fully this time, without trying to justify her actions. I didn't say, "I forgive you," it was too soon for that. Instead, I said, "We can try to build something new, Mom. But it has to be different. The old rules are dead." I laid out the new terms, my boundaries. My life with Sarah is our own. My finances are my own. We can have a relationship, but it has to be one based on honesty and mutual respect, not obligation. She just nodded, her eyes full of tears, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. It was a fragile, tentative start, like the first sprout pushing through hard-packed earth. Looking back on it all now, that slap was not an attack, but a gift. It was a loud, ugly, painful catalyst that forced a reaction that was decades overdue. The eventual break was inevitable. The deep cracks in our family's foundation were always going to lead to a collapse. I had simply spent my entire life trying to patch them, ignoring the fact that the structure itself was rotten. The greatest lesson I learned was a hard one. Sometimes the most loving, most constructive thing you can do for your family is to get out of the way and let them experience the full weight of their own choices. My refusal to be their safety net, my refusal to co-sign that loan, was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of tough love that forced them, especially Leo, to finally face reality. It forced them to grow in ways they never would have if I had continued to play my assigned role. My relationship with my mother is slowly being rebuilt, one careful, honest conversation at a time. It will never be what it was, and for that, I am grateful. It is something new, something more real. I see my father on holidays. He's quieter now, the authoritative bluster gone, replaced by a sullen, almost grudging respect in his eyes. He shakes my hand firmly, and we talk about the weather. It's not warm, but it's peaceful. Leo and I are civil. The ghost of the golden child has been exorcised, and in his place is just a man who is tired from a long day at work. We don't pretend to be best friends. The pedestal is gone, and maybe now, we can eventually learn to be brothers. Even my mother-in-law, Diane, offered a profound, shame-faced apology, admitting that my own family's appalling reaction had emboldened her awful behavior. For Sarah's sake, we accepted and moved on. The true moral of my story, the one that's been forged in fire, is this: you cannot build your house on land you don't own. You cannot derive your self-worth from people who refuse to see it. You have to be your own architect, your own engineer, your own builder. You have to lay your own foundation, brick by painstaking brick. My true family, I've learned, is the one I built myself, the one I chose. It's my incredible, unshakable wife, Sarah. It's my mentor, Mr. Henderson, who gave me a blueprint when my own father wouldn't. It's my loyal friends and my dedicated crew who show up every single day. They are the steel beams and solid concrete of my life. My story had a painful, dramatic climax, but building a life on your own terms is the greatest project you will ever undertake. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to draw a hard line in the sand to protect your own peace, share your experience in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about building a life of your own.